The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered wooden sign that read, Old Tucson, Arizona Territory, and Victoria Nichols felt her stomach twist with a fear that had nothing to do with the rough journey from St. Louis. She had been running for 3 months now, ever since that terrible night when Senator Harrison's wife had discovered them in what appeared to be a compromising position. The truth was far more innocent than what those society matrons had whispered about in their parlors. But innocence mattered little when reputation was everything. Victoria had been the governess to the Harrison children, and she had merely been helping the drunken senator to his study after he had collapsed in the hallway. But his wife, arriving home early from her charity function, had seen only what she wanted to see, and by morning, Victoria's name was ruined throughout St. Louis society. The scandal had spread like wildfire. She lost her position immediately. No respectable family would hire her. Her own family, mortified by the gossip, had turned her away. In desperation, Victoria had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride, corresponding with a rancher named Benjamin Edwards who owned land outside of Old Tucson. She had been honest about her past, or so she told herself, writing vague statements about needing a fresh start without detailing the scandal that had destroyed her life back east. Now, stepping down from the stagecoach into the dusty street of this frontier town, Victoria felt the weight of her deception. What if Benjamin had heard rumors? What if someone from St. Louis had written ahead? The year was 1876, and news traveled faster than most people realized, even out here in the Arizona Territory. The driver handed down her 2 modest carpetbags, and Victoria stood uncertainly in the afternoon sun, shading her eyes as she looked around. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings lining a single main street. A saloon stood on one corner, its painted sign faded by the relentless sun. Across the street, she could see a general store and what appeared to be a boarding house. Beyond the buildings, the landscape stretched out in shades of brown and gold, punctuated by massive saguaro cacti and distant purple mountains. Miss Nichols, Victoria turned to find a man approaching her, and her breath caught. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build that his worn work clothes could not hide. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung slightly too long beneath his wide-brimmed hat. But it was his eyes that held her attention, a striking blue-green that reminded her of the sea, set in a face weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome. "Yes," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "You must be Mr. Edwards." Benjamin Edwards removed his hat, revealing more of that dark hair, and she noticed the way the sun had lightened streaks of it. "Benjamin," he said. "Just Benjamin if that suits you, or Ben if you prefer." His voice was deep and warm with a slight drawl that she found oddly comforting. Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 20s, perhaps 28 or 29, only a few years older than her own 23 years. "Victoria," she replied, trying to smile despite her nervousness. "Thank you for meeting me." Benjamin picked up her bags as though they weighed nothing. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I have a wagon waiting. I thought we could stop by Reverend Miller's house if you are still willing. We could be married today before we head out to the ranch." Victoria's heart hammered. This was it, the moment when her new life would truly begin, or when everything would fall apart if he had learned the truth about her past. "I am willing," she said quietly, "but first I need to speak with you, privately." Something flickered in those remarkable eyes, concern perhaps, but Benjamin simply nodded. "There is a small garden behind the church. It should be quiet there." He led her down the street, nodding to several people who called out greetings. Victoria noticed the curious looks directed her way, but they seemed friendly enough, just the natural interest in a stranger arriving in a small town. The church was a simple white structure with a small bell tower, and true to Benjamin's word, there was a modest garden behind it, shaded by several cottonwood trees. Benjamin set down her bags and turned to face her, his expression serious now. "You are having second thoughts." "No," Victoria said quickly, then caught herself. "That is, not in the way you think. Benjamin, I need to tell you something about why I left St. Louis. In my letters, I said I needed a fresh start, but I did not explain why." She watched his face carefully as she spoke, telling him everything. The late-night incident with Senator Harrison, his wife's accusations, the scandal that had followed. She explained how she had lost everything, how even her own family had abandoned her rather than face the social consequences of standing by her side. "I swear to you nothing improper happened," she finished, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. "But no one believed me, or if they did, it did not matter. A woman's reputation, once tarnished, cannot be restored. I should have told you all of this before I came, but I was desperate, and I feared you would refuse me if you knew." Benjamin was silent for a long moment, and Victoria felt her hopes crumbling. Of course, he would send her back. What man wanted a bride with a scandal attached to her name, even if she was innocent? Then he stepped closer, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Your story starts fresh with me today, Victoria. Whatever happened back in St. Louis, whatever people said about you, it does not matter here. I believe you. But even if I did not, even if everything they said was true, it would not change the fact that I want you as my wife. We all have pasts. We all make mistakes or have mistakes made for us. That is what the frontier is for, is it not? Fresh starts." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried when her family turned her away. She had not cried during the long, uncertain journey west. But now, faced with this unexpected kindness from a man she barely knew, she found herself struggling to maintain her composure. "You mean that?" she whispered. It was not quite a question. "I mean every word." Benjamin reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender. "I know we do not know each other well yet. I know this is not how most marriages begin. But I read your letters, Victoria. I saw the intelligence in them, the humor, the strength. That is the woman I want to build a life with. The woman you are now, not the woman some scandal-mongering society ladies tried to destroy." "I do not understand why you would take such a risk on me," Victoria said, even as she leaned slightly into his touch. Benjamin smiled, and it transformed his serious face, making him look younger and even more handsome. "Maybe I am running from something too," he said. "Not a scandal, but expectations. My father wanted me to follow him into banking back in Boston. I wanted to raise horses and cattle under open skies. We argued about it for years before I finally left. He said I was throwing my life away, that I would amount to nothing. We have not spoken in 5 years. So you see, I understand what it is like to be judged for choices that others do not approve of." Victoria found herself smiling back. "Then perhaps we are well matched after all." "I think we might be." Benjamin offered her his arm. "Shall we go find Reverend Miller?" The wedding was simple but sincere. Reverend Miller was a kind-faced man in his 50s who asked no uncomfortable questions and seemed genuinely pleased to perform the ceremony. His wife served as a witness, along with a cowhand who worked for Benjamin and happened to be in town. The ceremony itself was brief, and when Benjamin kissed her at the Reverend's instruction, it was chaste and respectful, but Victoria felt warmth spread through her nonetheless. They had dinner at the boarding house. a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, and then Benjamin loaded her bags into a sturdy wagon and helped her onto the seat. As they left Old Tucson behind, heading west into the vast expanse of the territory, Victoria felt something she had not experienced in months: hope. "Tell me about your ranch," she said as the wagon rolled along a rutted track. Benjamin's face lit up the way it had when he smiled in the garden. "It is not large, not yet. About 500 acres along a creek that runs year-round. I have about 200 head of cattle, and I am starting to breed horses. That is my real passion, horses. I think there is a market for good stock out here, animals bred for the heat and terrain. I have been working on it for 3 years now, since I first claimed the land." "You built it from nothing, from less than nothing," Benjamin said with a laugh. "I had some money saved when I left Boston, but not much. The first year was brutal. I lived in a tent while I built the house. Lost half my cattle to disease the first summer. But I learned, and I kept at it. The house is still modest, but it is sturdy. 2 bedrooms, a main room that serves as kitchen and sitting area, and a good root cellar. I just finished adding a covered porch last month." Victoria heard the pride in his voice and found herself warming to him even more. Here was a man who built things, who worked with his hands, who was not afraid of hardship, so different from the soft, entitled men she had known in St. Louis. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "To help, I mean. On the ranch." Benjamin glanced at her, those blue-green eyes assessing. "Can you cook?" "Yes, and keep house and sew and tend a garden. I can also keep accounts if that would be helpful. I was educated at a ladies' academy before I became a governess." "All of that would be helpful," Benjamin said. "I admit the housekeeping has suffered since I have been out here, and my cooking is edible, but not much more than that. But Victoria, I do not expect you to work yourself to exhaustion. This is meant to be a partnership. We will figure out together how to divide the labor." The sun was lowering toward the horizon when they finally arrived at the ranch. The house was exactly as Benjamin had described it, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch facing east. Behind it stood a barn and several corrals, and beyond that, Victoria could see cattle grazing in the distance. A line of cottonwoods marked the path of the creek, and the whole property was backed by a range of low hills that glowed golden in the late afternoon light. "It is beautiful," Victoria said, and she meant it. There was something clean and honest about the place, a simplicity that appealed to her after the ornate fakery of St. Louis society. Benjamin helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm at her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Edwards." "Mrs. Edwards?" Victoria tested the name in her mind and found she liked it. A new name for a new life. Inside, the house was as modest as Benjamin had warned, but it was clean and well built. The main room had a stone fireplace, a simple kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs. 2 doors led to the bedrooms, both small but adequate. "You take the larger room," Benjamin said, setting her bags down. "I will move my things to the smaller one." Victoria turned to him in surprise. "But we are married now." "We are," Benjamin agreed. "But I will not push you into anything you are not ready for, Victoria. We have time to get to know each other properly. There is no rush." His consideration touched her deeply, but Victoria also felt a strange disappointment. She studied this man who was now her husband, taking in the strong lines of his face, the capable hands, the patient kindness in his eyes. She had not expected to feel attracted to him so quickly, but she did. "That is very thoughtful," she said carefully. "But Benjamin, I do not need to be treated like fragile china. If we are going to build a life together, we should start as we mean to go on, as husband and wife." Something heated flared in Benjamin's eyes, but his voice remained gentle. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." Victoria stepped closer to him, close enough to smell the scent of leather and sun-warmed skin. "I have been living in fear for months, afraid of every shadow, every whispered word. I do not want to be afraid anymore. I want to start living again." Benjamin cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Then we will start living," he murmured and kissed her. This kiss was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding ceremony. This was deep and searching, and Victoria felt it down to her toes. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and Benjamin made a sound low in his throat that sent shivers through her. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and Victoria felt safe for the first time in so very long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "I will try to be patient," he said. "I will try to take this slow. But God help me, Victoria, you are making it difficult." She laughed, breathless and suddenly giddy. "Then stop being patient." The next few weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and growing affection. Victoria threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains from fabric Benjamin bought her on his next trip to town, planting a garden near the creek, learning to cook on the temperamental stove. Benjamin taught her to ride, patiently coaching her through her nervousness until she could handle the gentle mare he had picked out for her. The physical intimacy between them grew naturally, awkwardness giving way to passion, and then to genuine tenderness. Victoria discovered that her husband was both strong and gentle, demanding and giving. The nights they spent together were a revelation, nothing like the fumbling embarrassment she had half expected from her married friend's cryptic warnings. But it was the days that surprised her most. Benjamin was easy to be around, quick to laugh and unfailingly kind. He consulted her about decisions for the ranch, valuing her opinions on everything from which cattle to sell to where to build a new fence line. He told her stories about his childhood in Boston, about his difficult relationship with his father, about the dreams that had driven him west. Victoria, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told him about her own childhood, growing up in modest comfort in St. Louis, about losing her mother young and being raised by a father who had loved her but never quite known what to do with a daughter. She told him about her years at the academy, about becoming a governess because it was one of the few respectable ways for an educated woman to support herself. "Do you miss it?" Benjamin asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "The city, I mean, the society life." Victoria considered the question seriously. "I miss the culture sometimes, the libraries, the music, but the society itself, no. I thought I fit into that world, but I was fooling myself. Those people only valued me as long as I served a purpose and caused no trouble. The moment I became inconvenient, they discarded me without a second thought." "Their loss," Benjamin said, reaching over to take her hand. "My gain." She squeezed his fingers, feeling that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. Was this love? She thought it might be. It was certainly deeper than anything she had felt before. It was late in October when trouble arrived. Victoria was in the garden, harvesting the last of the squash before the first frost, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw a fine carriage approaching, pulled by a matched pair of bays that looked absurdly out of place in the rough territory landscape. Her stomach dropped. She knew, even before the carriage stopped, that this had something to do with her past. The door opened and a man stepped out, tall and distinguished in an expensive suit. Victoria recognized him immediately. Congressman Richard Nelson, a close friend of Senator Harrison and one of the most powerful men in St. Louis society. "Miss Nichols," he said, and Victoria flinched at the use of her maiden name. "Or should I say Mrs. Edwards? News of your marriage reached us only recently." Victoria stood, wiping her dirty hands on her apron. Her mind raced. How had he found her? Why had he come all this way? Congressman Nelson, this is unexpected. I imagine it is. Nelson's smile was cold. May we speak privately? Anything you have to say to my wife, you can say in front of me. Victoria turned to see Benjamin approaching from the barn, his expression hard. She had never seen him look like that before, dangerous and protective. Nelson's eyes narrowed as he assessed Benjamin. Mr. Edwards, I presume. I am Congressman Richard Nelson from Missouri. I've traveled a very long way to speak with your wife about a matter of some importance. Then speak, Benjamin said, coming to stand beside Victoria. His hand found hers, warm and solid. Nelson's smile grew sharper. Very well, Mrs. Edwards, Senator Harrison has sent me to make you an offer. He is prepared to give you a substantial sum of money, $5,000 to be precise, in exchange for your sworn statement that nothing improper occurred between you. Victoria stared at him, not understanding. But that is the truth. Nothing happened. The truth is what people believe, Nelson said with a dismissive wave of his hand. And right now, there are people who believe Senator Harrison took advantage of his position and his governess. These rumors are damaging his political career. With your sworn statement, we can put this matter to rest. She already told everyone nothing happened, Benjamin said, his voice tight with anger. She told the truth from the beginning. No one wanted to listen. The situation has changed, Nelson replied. Senator Harrison's wife has left him. She has made certain accusations in her divorce proceedings that paint her husband in a very unfavorable light. Your wife's testimony could help refute those accusations. Victoria felt sick. Mrs. Harrison is divorcing him, but she was the one who accused me. Yes, well, it seems there were other incidents, other governesses. Nelson's expression held distaste. The senator was not as careful as he should have been, but that is not your concern. Your concern is the $5,000 he is offering. That is a considerable sum, Mrs. Edwards. Enough to significantly improve this ranch of yours. Benjamin's hand tightened on Victoria's. We do not need his money. Do you not? Nelson looked around pointedly at the modest ranch, the simple house. $5,000 could buy a lot of land, a lot of cattle. It could be the difference between scraping by and genuine prosperity. Get off my property, Benjamin said quietly. Nelson's eyebrows rose. I beg your pardon, you heard me. Get back in your fancy carriage and get off my land. My wife does not owe the senator anything. She told the truth about what happened. If that truth helps him now, fine. If it does not, that is his problem. But she is not going to sell her statement for his blood money. Mr. Edwards, I do not think you understand the opportunity being offered here. I understand perfectly. Benjamin took a step forward, and despite being dressed in worn work clothes and covered in dust, he was suddenly more intimidating than the congressman in his expensive suit. I understand that your senator friend took advantage of his position. I understand that my wife lost everything because she had the misfortune to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I understand that he let her suffer for months without saying a word in her defense, and now that his own reputation is at risk, he wants to buy her testimony. Well, she is not for sale, neither is her integrity. Nelson's face darkened. You are making a mistake. The mistake would be taking his money, Victoria said, finding her voice at last. Benjamin is right. I told the truth then, and I will tell the truth now if I am asked. But I will not be bought. I will not give Senator Harrison the satisfaction of thinking he can fix his problems with money. You were happy enough to accept his family's money when they paid you to be their governess, Nelson said snidely. I earned that money through honest work, Victoria shot back. This is entirely different and you know it. Nelson studied them both for a long moment, then shrugged. Very well. But do not expect any help from St. Louis society should you ever need it. You have made your choice. We are quite happy with our choice, Benjamin said. They watched in silence as Nelson climbed back into his carriage and drove away. Only when the dust had settled did Victoria turn to Benjamin. That was a lot of money, she said quietly. Enough to truly secure the ranch. I do not want it, Benjamin said firmly. Not that way. We will build this place with our own hands, our own work. We will not owe our success to a man who tried to destroy you. Victoria threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for standing up for me, for believing in me. Benjamin held her tight. Your story started fresh here, remember. That means you do not owe anything to your past. You are free of it, Victoria, truly free. As the days grew shorter and cooler, Victoria realized he was right. The visit from Congressman Nelson had been a test of sorts, a final tie to her old life. By rejecting his offer, she had severed that tie completely. The work of the ranch consumed them as winter approached. They spent long days preparing for the cold months ahead, moving cattle to winter pastures, repairing fences, stocking the root cellar with preserved foods. Benjamin hired 2 additional hands, young cowboys named Tom and William, who lived in the bunkhouse he had built the previous year. Victoria found herself cooking for 4 now, and she did not mind the extra work. The ranch was beginning to feel like a real operation, something substantial and lasting. She also discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, through missed courses and morning queasiness. And when she was finally certain, she told Benjamin one evening as they were getting ready for bed. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Victoria felt a flutter of nervousness. Then a huge smile broke across his face and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing. A baby, he said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. In late spring, I think, Victoria said, laughing with him. Are you happy? Happy, Benjamin set her down and cupped her face in his hands. Victoria, I am more than happy. I am grateful. I am blessed. I am the luckiest man in the Arizona Territory. He kissed her then, sweet and tender, and Victoria felt tears of joy prick her eyes. This was nothing like she had imagined her life would be. This rough ranch, this wild territory, this man who had given her a fresh start. But it was perfect. It was hers. The winter was cold but manageable. They spent the dark evenings by the fire, Benjamin carving a cradle from cottonwood while Victoria sewed baby clothes. Tom and William proved to be good workers and decent company, joining them for dinner most evenings and filling the house with talk and laughter. Victoria wrote letters to her father, telling him about her new life and her pregnancy. She did not expect a reply. He had made his position clear when the scandal broke. But she wanted him to know anyway, wanted him to understand that she had survived and even thrived despite being cast out. To her surprise, a letter arrived in early February. Her father wrote that he was sorry for abandoning her, that his fear of social consequences had made him a coward. He wanted to know if she would consider allowing him back into her life, if only through correspondence. He enclosed a money order for $100, a gift for his grandchild. Victoria cried when she read the letter, but they were healing tears. She wrote back that same day, telling him she forgave him and would be happy to correspond. The money, she said, would go toward building a new barn, something they could point to in future years and say, "Your grandfather helped build that." Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new grass. The cattle fattened on the fresh growth, and Benjamin's horses produced several promising foals. Victoria's belly grew round, and she found herself moving more slowly, tiring more easily. Benjamin was endlessly patient, taking over more of the household chores and refusing to let her do anything strenuous. "I am pregnant, not dying," she protested one day when he insisted she sit down while he hung the wash. "I know," he said with that smile that never failed to warm her heart. "But humor me. I have never done this before, and I am terrified something will go wrong." "Nothing will go wrong," Victoria assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." But she let him fuss over her anyway, touched by his concern. The baby arrived on a hot day in June, after a labor that lasted from dawn until late afternoon. The doctor from Old Tucson arrived in time to help, along with his wife who had experience as a midwife. Benjamin stayed with Victoria throughout, holding her hand and wiping her forehead, his face tight with worry. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and wailing, Benjamin wept openly. "He is perfect," he kept saying. "Victoria, he is perfect." They named him James, after Victoria's late grandfather. He had Benjamin's dark hair and what appeared to be Victoria's brown eyes, though the doctor's wife said it was too early to be certain about eye color. He was healthy and strong, with a surprisingly loud cry for such a small person. The first few months were exhausting. James needed to be fed every few hours, day and night, and Victoria walked through those early weeks in a fog of sleeplessness. But there was joy, too, in watching Benjamin cradle their son, in seeing the fierce love on his face as he looked down at the tiny person they had created together. Tom and William were surprisingly helpful, taking on extra work around the ranch so Benjamin could spend more time with his new family. They also proved to be endlessly entertained by the baby, taking turns holding him and making ridiculous faces to coax out his first smiles. As summer turned to fall, life settled into a new rhythm. James grew and thrived, becoming more alert and interactive. The ranch prospered, with Benjamin selling several horses at good prices, and the cattle herd growing steadily. Victoria's father continued to write regularly, and the relationship between them slowly healed, built on honest words and shared news rather than the stiff formality that had characterized their earlier relationship. One evening in October, almost exactly a year after Congressman Nelson's visit, Victoria and Benjamin sat on their porch as they often did, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. James slept in Victoria's arms, one tiny fist curled against his cheek. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked suddenly. "Coming out here, marrying a stranger?" Victoria looked at her husband, this man who had given her everything when she had nothing. "Never," she said firmly. "This is the life I was meant to have. You are the man I was meant to find." All the pain that came before, all the scandal and shame, it was worth it because it led me here. Benjamin leaned over and kissed her forehead, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Your story started fresh with me," he said quietly. "But you know what? My story started fresh with you too. I was alone out here, building something but not really living. You gave me a reason to build, a purpose beyond just proving my father wrong. You gave me a family. We gave each other a fresh start," Victoria said. "That is what love is, I think. Choosing each other every day, building something new together." "I do love you," Benjamin said. "I know we married as strangers, but Victoria, I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Victoria replied, the words feeling both momentous and natural. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day in the garden behind the church, when you told me my story could start fresh. You saw me, really saw me, in a way no one else ever had." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them. The lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. These were the sounds of home, The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters and drought summers, cattle lost to disease and horses that did not sell. But there were more good times than bad. Benjamin's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and ranchers from across the territory came to buy his stock. They added to their land holdings, slowly building the ranch into something substantial. James grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy with his father's blue-green eyes and his mother's quick smile. When he was 3, Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her father's dark hair and a stubborn streak that made them all laugh. 2 years later came another son, Matthew, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. Victoria often thought about the scandal that had driven her west, but the pain of it had faded completely. She had been right when she told Benjamin that all the suffering had been worth it. Her old life seemed like something that had happened to someone else, a story she had read rather than lived. Her father came to visit when James was 5, making the long journey from St. Louis despite his advancing age. It was awkward at first, years of hurt and distance between them. But watching him with his grandchildren, seeing the regret and love in his eyes, Victoria found she could forgive him completely. He stayed for 2 months, and when he left, it was with promises to return the following year. Tom and William remained with the ranch, becoming family in all but name. They built their own small houses on the property, and eventually William married a widow from town who had 2 children of her own. Tom declared himself a confirmed bachelor, but he doted on all the children as though they were his own nieces and nephews. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the time James was 10, the Edwards Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. Benjamin had realized his dream of breeding horses perfectly suited for the territory, and their cattle operation provided steady income. They had built a larger house, adding rooms as their family grew, but Victoria insisted on keeping the original structure intact, the simple 2-room house where their life together had begun. "Why?" Benjamin asked, when she refused his suggestion to tear it down and build completely fresh. "Because that is where our story started," Victoria explained. "Where you told me I could start fresh. I do not ever want to forget that moment, that gift you gave me." So they kept it, using the original building as a workshop and storage room, a tangible reminder of their beginning. Victoria also continued her correspondence with her father until his death when James was 12. She mourned him genuinely, grateful that they had reconciled and rebuilt their relationship in his final years. He left her a modest inheritance, which she and Benjamin used to build a school on their property. Several other ranching families had settled in the area by then, and their children needed education. Victoria herself served as the first teacher, finding joy in the work she had once done as a governess, but now did on her own terms, for her own community. The scandal that had once defined her became nothing more than an old story, barely remembered even by Victoria herself. She heard through a letter from an old friend that Senator Harrison had eventually lost his political career and died alone and largely forgotten. Victoria felt nothing but pity for him. His choices had cost him everything, while her forced exile had given her everything that mattered. On their 20th anniversary, Benjamin surprised Victoria with a trip back to Old Tucson. They stayed at the boarding house where they had eaten their wedding dinner, and Benjamin took her to the church where they had married. "You remember what you said to me that day?" he asked as they stood in the small garden behind the church, the same garden where Victoria had confessed her scandal. "I said I did not understand why you would take such a risk on me," Victoria replied, remembering. "And I said maybe I was running from something too." Benjamin pulled her close, and at 48 he was still as handsome as he had been at 28, his dark hair now streaked with silver, his face more lined but his eyes just as striking. But the truth is, I was not running from anything. I was running toward something, even though I did not know it yet. I was running toward you. Victoria laughed, standing on her toes to kiss him. At 43, she was more confident and content than she had ever been in her youth. That is terribly romantic, Mr. Edwards. I am a terribly romantic man, Mrs. Edwards. You just bring it out in me. They renewed their vows that day, with Reverend Miller performing the ceremony just as he had 20 years before. His wife was there again, 20 years older but still spry and delighted to witness their renewal. Several of their friends from the territory had come along, making it a real celebration. That evening, as they prepared to head back to the ranch, Victoria stood with Benjamin watching the sun set over Old Tucson. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For giving me a fresh start, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." Benjamin wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "You do not need to thank me for any of that. Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I have ever done. As for the fresh start, we gave that to each other." Victoria leaned back against him, feeling safe and loved and home. "Do you think our children understand how lucky we are, how unlikely it was that we found each other? I think they will understand someday when they are older. But for now, they just think this is how life works, and maybe that is okay. Maybe it is good that they grow up assuming love and security are normal, that fresh starts are always possible." "You are right," Victoria said. "We made something good here, Benjamin. Out of scandal and desperation and two people taking a chance on each other, we built something real and lasting." "The best things often come from unlikely beginnings," Benjamin replied. "I read that somewhere once and I always thought it was just a pretty sentiment. But it is true. Our unlikely beginning gave us everything." They returned home the next day to find their children had decorated the house with wildflowers and ribbons. Sarah had baked a lopsided cake, and the boys had cleaned the house from top to bottom. William's family and Tom joined them for dinner, and they spent the evening celebrating not just the anniversary but the life they had all built together. As Victoria tucked Sarah into bed that night, her daughter asked, "Mama, did you always know you would marry Papa?" Victoria smiled, stroking her daughter's dark hair. "No, sweetheart. In fact, we did not know each other at all when we married." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Really? But you love each other so much." "We do now. But love is not always something that happens immediately. Sometimes it grows slowly over time as you get to know someone and choose them every day." "That sounds nice," Sarah said sleepily. "Choosing someone every day." "It is nice," Victoria agreed. "It is the best thing in the world." After Sarah drifted off to sleep, Victoria found Benjamin in their bedroom, standing by the window and looking out at the ranch they had built together. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just remembering," he said. "That first day when you stepped off the stagecoach. You looked so scared, so uncertain, but there was strength in you too. I saw it even then. I remember thinking that you were either going to be the biggest mistake of my life or the best thing that ever happened to me. And which was I?" Benjamin turned in her arms, pulling her close. "The best thing, of course, the very best thing. You made me better, Victoria. You made everything better." "You saved me," Victoria said simply. "When I came here, I was broken. I thought my life was over, but you saw past all that. You gave me permission to start over, to be someone new. You saved me." "We saved each other," Benjamin corrected gently. "That is what love does. It saves us from loneliness, from bitterness, from giving up. It gives us a reason to keep building, keep trying, keep growing." They stood together in comfortable silence. the moonlight streaming through the window and illuminating the life they had created. In the distance, Victoria could hear cattle lowing softly, horses moving in the corrals, the familiar sounds of the ranch at night. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had not found each other?" Victoria asked. "If I had not answered your advertisement or if you had chosen someone else?" "Sometimes," Benjamin admitted, "but I do not dwell on it. We did find each other. That is what matters. All the roads we traveled, all the choices we made, they led us to each other. That was not chance or luck. That was meant to be." Victoria wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that all the pain and scandal and fear had served a purpose, that it had been leading her here all along. And looking around at this life she had built, at this man she loved and the children they had raised and the community they had created, she found she did believe it. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and growth. James grew into a fine young man, strong and capable like his father, kind and thoughtful like his mother. He took over more and more of the ranch work, proving himself a natural horseman and cattleman. Sarah inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, and she decided to become a teacher like Victoria, attending a women's college in California and returning to expand the ranch school into something that served the entire region. Matthew, true to his quiet nature, discovered a gift for numbers and business, taking over the financial management of the ranch and increasing their prosperity even further. Victoria and Benjamin aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents when James married a young woman from town and had 3 children in quick succession. Sarah eventually married as well, choosing a fellow teacher, and they had 2 daughters. Matthew married late, at 35, to a widow with a child of her own, and together they had 1 son. The ranch that had started as 500 acres and a dream now encompassed over 2,000 acres and employed a dozen families. The Edwards name was respected throughout the territory and beyond, known for quality horses and honest dealings. But more than their business success, Benjamin and Victoria were known for their kindness and generosity. They had helped numerous families get their start, offering loans without interest and advice without condescension. The school Victoria had founded educated hundreds of children over the years, many of whom went on to make their own marks on the growing territory. When Victoria was 63 and Benjamin 68, they took another trip back to Old Tucson. The town had grown considerably since their first visit, with paved streets and electric lights and automobiles competing with horses on the roads. But the church was still there, and Reverend Miller's son now served as pastor. "It feels like coming back to the beginning," Victoria said as they stood once again in the garden where their story had truly started. "Except we are not at the beginning anymore," Benjamin said, his voice a little weaker than it had been, his breathing a little more labored. "We are near the end of this particular story." Victoria felt her chest tighten. They both knew Benjamin's heart was failing. The doctor had told them he had perhaps a year, maybe 2 if he was lucky and careful. They had decided not to tell the children yet, not wanting to cast a shadow over their lives until it was necessary. "Do not say that," she whispered. "I am not afraid, Victoria. How can I be when I have lived such a good life? When I have been loved so well?" Benjamin cupped her face in his hands, hands that trembled slightly now but were still gentle. "If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Every choice, every day, every moment with you has been exactly right." "I love you," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "I have loved you for 42 years, and I will love you until I draw my last breath. And I love you." My mail-order bride who was running from a scandal, who turned out to be the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. Benjamin kissed her softly. Your story started fresh with me that day. But you should know, my story started fresh with you too. You gave me purpose and meaning and joy. You gave me everything. They stayed in Old Tucson for a week, revisiting all the places that had been important to their early days together. They had dinner at the boarding house, now run by the grandson of the original owner. They visited the general store where Benjamin had bought Victoria her first horse. They drove out to the spot where the stagecoach had stopped that first day, where Victoria had stepped into the Arizona sun and begun her new life. Benjamin lived for another 18 months after that trip, long enough to see his youngest grandchild born, long enough to celebrate one more Christmas surrounded by children and grandchildren. He died peacefully in his sleep on a warm spring night, Victoria beside him as she had been for their entire marriage. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that Victoria had not anticipated. For the first time in over 40 years, she was alone. She knew she should be grateful for the life they had shared, for the decades of love and partnership and joy. And she was grateful. But she was also heartbroken. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying at the ranch, making sure she was never truly alone. But in the quiet moments, Victoria found herself talking to Benjamin as though he were still there. She told him about the children, about the ranch, about the wildflowers blooming by the creek. She told him she missed him, that her heart was broken, that she did not know how to live in a world where he did not exist. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. She threw herself into the school, teaching even though she no longer needed to work. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure his memory lived on. She maintained the ranch with Matthew's help, determined to preserve what she and Benjamin had built together. On what would have been their 50th anniversary, Victoria went back to Old Tucson one final time. She was 73 now, her dark hair completely silver, her face lined with age and experience. But she still moved with purpose, still held herself with dignity. The church was still there, and the garden behind it, though much had changed around it. Victoria sat on the bench under the cottonwood trees, the same spot where she had confessed her scandal to a stranger who would become her everything. "We did it, Benjamin," she said softly, speaking to the husband who lived on in her heart. "We built something beautiful. We took our fresh start and we made it count. Our children are good people. Our grandchildren are growing up safe and loved. The ranch is thriving. The school is helping dozens of children every year. We did everything we set out to do and so much more." She could almost hear his voice in the rustle of the leaves, almost feel his hand in hers. The grief was still there, but it had softened into something bearable, woven together with gratitude and love and precious memories. "I will love you until I draw my last breath," she had told him that last visit. And she would. This love that had started with a mail-order bride advertisement and a cowboy willing to give her a fresh start, this love had transformed both their lives. It had built a family, a ranch, a community. It had given them everything that mattered. Victoria lived for another 12 years after Benjamin's death, surrounded by family and purpose. She saw grandchildren graduate from college and great-grandchildren born. She saw the territory become a state and the ranch continue to prosper under Matthew's management with James's help. When she died at 85, peacefully in her sleep just as Benjamin had, the funeral drew people from all over Arizona. Former students, ranch families, business associates, friends. They all came to pay their respects to the woman who had arrived in Old Tucson as a frightened refugee from scandal and had become one of the most beloved figures in the region. At Victoria's request, She was buried next to Benjamin under the cottonwood trees at the ranch, the same trees that marked the creek where she had once planted her first garden. The headstone was simple: Victoria Edwards, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher. But if you looked closely, you could see the smaller inscription below. Her story started fresh here. Sarah, now 60 herself, stood at her mother's grave after the funeral, her own children and grandchildren around her. "Tell us again how grandmother and grandfather met," one of the great-grandchildren asked. Sarah smiled, even through her tears. "Your great-grandmother came to Old Tucson as a mail-order bride, running from a scandal that had destroyed her life back east. She was frightened and alone, but she had courage. And your great-grandfather, he was a cowboy building a ranch and a dream. When she told him about her past, about the scandal, do you know what he said?" "What?" the children chorused. He said, "Your story starts fresh with me today," and it did. They built a life together, a beautiful life full of love and hard work and family. They proved that where you come from does not matter as much as where you are going and who you choose to travel with. "That is so romantic," one of the teenage great-granddaughters sighed. "It is," Sarah agreed. "But more than that, it is true. They really did love each other like that. They chose each other every single day, through good times and bad, for 50 years. That is what real love looks like." The family gathered for dinner that night at the ranch house, now greatly expanded from the simple structure where Benjamin and Victoria had started their life together. But that original two-room house was still there, carefully preserved, now serving as a small museum of sorts. Sarah's children had collected photographs and artifacts from their grandparents' life, creating a record of the love story that had started it all. One of Victoria's great-great-grandchildren, a little girl of 7 named Emma, stood in the original bedroom where Victoria had first slept as a bride. "It is so small," she said wonderingly. "They did not need much space," her mother explained. "They had each other, and that was enough. Everything else, they built together." "I want a love like that someday," Emma declared with the certainty of childhood. "Then you will have to be brave like your great-great-grandmother," her mother said. "She left everything she knew to come to a strange place and marry a stranger. That took real courage. And you will need to be kind and wise like your great-great-grandfather," her father added. He saw past everyone else's judgment to who Victoria really was. He gave her a chance when no one else would. Emma nodded seriously, absorbing this. Around her, 3 generations of the Edwards family filled the house, their voices and laughter echoing through rooms that had been built on a foundation of second chances and stubborn hope. Outside, the Arizona sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the same colors that had painted the sky on that evening 42 years earlier, when Victoria had first told Benjamin she loved him. The ranch stretched out in all directions, prosperous and productive, a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose to believe in each other and in fresh starts. The scandal that had once defined Victoria Nichols was long forgotten, remembered by no one except as a footnote in a love story. The woman she had been, frightened and alone stepping off that stagecoach, had been transformed by love and time and her own determination into someone strong and purposeful and deeply loved. And the cowboy who had offered her a fresh start. He had found his own transformation, turning his solitary dream into a shared reality, his lonely ranch into a home filled with love and laughter and legacy. Their story had started fresh that day in the garden behind the church in Old Tucson, but it had never really ended. It lived on in the ranch they built, the children they raised, the community they served, the love they shared. It lived on in the memories of those who knew them and in the blood of the generations that came after. Somewhere in the evening breeze that rustled through the cottonwoods, you could almost hear Benjamin's voice saying those transformative words. Your story starts fresh with me today. And if you listened very carefully, you might hear Victoria's response, the one she gave him every day of their life together in words and actions and unwavering devotion. And mine with you, my love, always with you. The end of their earthly story was just the beginning of their legacy, a legacy of love and second chances that would ripple forward through time, touching lives not yet born, inspiring hearts not yet broken, offering hope to anyone who needed to hear that fresh starts are always possible, that love can redeem even the most scandalous past, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simple courage to say yes to an unknown future.